Tonight, does a win in Michigan bode well for Bernie Sanders in upcoming states? The latest on the proposed Syracuse-Onondaga County merger and an analysis of the rise of Donald Trump. This is Talking Points. Welcome to Talking Points. I'm Alex Amico. To begin, we recap our top stories. The Justice Department is asking a California court to force Apple to unlock the iPhone belonging to the alleged San Bernardino shooter. Apple CEO Tim Cook has previously stated that he would cooperate with the FBI in this case, but also stressed the importance of preserving Apple customers' privacy. This is a developing story. The recently elected Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau traveled to Washington this morning to meet with President Obama. The two leaders held a press conference on the White House lawn and promised to fight against global warming, stating to play a leadership role internationally in the low-carbon global economy over the coming decades. This is the first time in 17 years that a Canadian Prime Minister has visited the U.S. on a state visit. Former New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg announced Monday that he would not run a third-party bid for president. Bloomberg decided not to run out of fear that Donald Trump may win. Sparks flew last night at the Democratic debate following a Bernie Sanders upset in Michigan. Clinton and Sanders agreed that deportations must end, but still attacked each other's past records. Another contested issue during the debate was climate change. And in breaking news, former Republican candidate Ben Carson is expected to endorse Donald Trump tomorrow morning. The 2016 election continues to heat up with 9 Republican and 6 Democratic primaries this week. On the Republican side, Donald Trump won 5 states, including a big win in Michigan on Tuesday night, where he won with 36.5%. Ted Cruz won in Idaho, Kansas, and Maine, and Rubio won Puerto Rico. With Rubio coming in 3rd or 4th in 8 of the states, many of the GOP establishment are starting to see Ted Cruz as the best Trump alternative. For Democrats, Bernie Sanders had a huge week, winning 4 of the 6 states, including a huge upset in Michigan. Sanders was projected to lose by 21 points, but ended up winning by 1.5%. Sanders also won big in Maine, Kansas, and Nebraska. Clinton once again dominated in southern states, winning Louisiana and Mississippi, where she won by 66 points. The win in Michigan showed that Sanders is capable of winning a racially diverse state and should give him some momentum going into the all-important Ohio and Florida primaries. The next major contest in the election season is on March 15th, when the candidates duke it out in several major states, including Florida and Ohio. Here to break down what we can expect going forward, our Talking Points correspondents Galat Malamed and Shruti Marathe. Thanks for joining me. So my first question is for you, Galat. March 15th, Bernie Sanders just won in Michigan. Ohio is a very similar electorate to that. What can we expect from the Democrats on Tuesday?
So Clinton is expected to win in all the states. For Ohio, North Carolina, and Illinois, it's similar with about a 20-point margin of victory. Florida, southern state, is where she's expected to have the biggest margin of victory at 29 points. And this is really key because Florida also has a lot of delegates, over 200. Missouri has a much narrower margin of victory. Bernie could potentially get the lead there, and this is where the least amount of delegates are for that day. And
Shruti, it's really hard to overstate the importance of this week for the Republicans. Like, for all intents and purposes, this week is going to tell us whether or not Donald Trump will become the nominee before the convention. So what can we expect in the big states voting there, Ohio and Florida?
Well, winner-take-all states, Trump is leading in the polls. Of course, we do need to see if the Republican establishment wants to try and get a lead in this victory. Kasich and Rubio need to win their respective home states. Right now, Trump is leading Rubio in the polls in Florida. Kasich isn't as far behind in Trump in Ohio, but he is far behind, so we might see Trump take both winner-take-alls.
And Galat, as far as going forward with delegates, what's the path forward for both of the candidates? What's the deal with the delegate math?
Yes, so in order to win, you need 2,383 delegates. Now, right now, Clinton is already more than halfway there. She has 1,223. Bernie has less than half of Clinton. He's at 547 right now. And he's acquired 30% of the delegates so far. So if Bernie keeps up at the same pace, meaning he'll receive 30% of the delegates up for grabs, he's still going to be 1,000 delegates shy of what you need for the nomination. Clinton, on the other hand, if she can receive 40% of the remaining delegates, she'll be good for the nomination. So what this means is that Bernie needs to start winning states fast, and not only that, but by larger margins of victory than he has in the past.
We should clarify that a great deal of Clinton's delegates that put her over 1,000 are, in fact, super delegates. But
yes.
Shruti, for the Republicans, there's a bunch of different scenarios this could go after Tuesday, but what does the delegate math look like for them?
Well, right now, again, we see Trump having an overwhelming lead in delegates. And even from last Tuesday's elections, Trump and Cruz are really the only ones that got a significant amount of delegates to mean anything. Kasich and Rubio, again, need to win their home states to try and get a victory. If Rubio does, he can pick up 99 in Florida, and Kasich can 66 in Ohio. Again, not enough to beat Trump, but a coming victory.
And Galat, Michigan was by far Bernie Sanders' biggest win of this primary cycle and one of the biggest political upsets in recent memory. What does that mean for him going forward? How can he build off of this?
Yeah, Michigan was huge. It's really true the margin of victory wasn't that big, but the moral victory is huge. It gives him the fuel to move forward. Michigan is definitely one of the most diverse states he's won so far, a lot more diverse than states he typically wins like New Hampshire and Oklahoma. He was able to get 30% of the black vote in Michigan, which, though he still lags Clinton by a lot in that category, he definitely improved on his Super Tuesday performance, where he was performing under 20% with the black vote in all the states except one. So this is really the fuel to the fire to keep his campaign going and shows that he can win other racially diverse states too.
And Shruti, what are the odds right now, given what there are different scenarios that could happen on Tuesday, but what are the odds that we end up with every political junkie's dream, a brokered Republican convention?
Well, you know what? And even in order to have a brokered Republican convention, we really need to keep Trump away from getting those magic number of delegates. And in order to do that, we need to have Kasich and Rubio and even Cruz pick up some more delegates. And that doesn't look like it's going to happen on March 15th because Trump is leading in the majority of the polls. However, it's not a long shot. If the GOP establishment does try and rally and, people keep making speeches, we saw Romney speak last week, just something to try and take down Donald.
Shruti and Galat, thank you so much for joining me. We'll be right back.
Kinda new here, but I've noticed a trend. My human does this funny thing where she goes around and gets all my toys, and then she hides them in that basket by the door. But it's always the same basket, and it's always in the same place. And then she acts so surprised when I find them, but, she's putting them in the same basket. Again. It's like, hello, that's where you put it last time. You were the worst at hide and go seek.
Thank you. You got a king?
Go fish!
The smallest moments can have the biggest impact on a child's life. Take time to be a dad today.
Here in Syracuse, conflict is brewing over a proposed plan to merge the governments of the city of Syracuse and Onondaga County. Talking Points correspondent Thomas Viola sat down with Newhouse Dean David Rubin to discuss the plan and why it has met with so much pushback.
Thanks, Alex. Earlier this year, the Consensus CNY Committee, a nonprofit independent research group, released a report recommending that Syracuse merge its government with the rest of Onondaga County. The committee's proposal says such a merger would benefit both sides. The county government, which encompasses the surrounding townships, currently has many small town governments, which Dean Rubin explained aren't as financially stable as they'd like to be.
Well, according to Consensus, a number of the towns and villages in the county are facing a very serious, potentially bankrupting situation within the next decade.
Meanwhile, the city of Syracuse itself has its own problems.
We are losing population. We are a very hostile climate for business. Young people don't want to stay here or move here.
According to the Consensus Committee, both the city and the county have budgetary issues, yet the proposed merger has faced severe oppositions from the residents of both sides. A lot of the opposition has to do with a desire to keep things as they are. People in the city are worried about what political power they do have would be diluted under a larger government body. Meanwhile, residents of the rest of the county think that they are fine on their own and don't see a reason to take on the financial burden that would come with sharing a government with the city itself. Because of this, many, including Rubin, are not very optimistic that change will come anytime soon from the Consensus CNY Committee's efforts.
If you forced me to make a bet as to whether or not the citizens of Syracuse and Onondaga County will actually take bold action, I would say no.
Gerrymandering has been a hot political topic lately, and one state drawing criticism in particular is North Carolina. Here to discuss gerrymandering and its impact on the election is Talking Points correspondent and North Carolina native Joey Lino. Joey Lino, thank you for joining us, Joey. So my first question for you is, how has gerrymandering had an impact on recent elections? 2014, we saw a Republican wave in the midterms. House races, Republicans are pretty solidly in control in the House. How has gerrymandering played a factor in that?
Well, under President Obama, Democrats have lost more seats, state legislatures, governors, and congressional seats than under any president in history. This could have a lot to do with the Tea Party's influence during the 2010 elections, which resulted in a lot of Republicans controlling state legislatures. So when it came time to redraw the districts after the 2010 census, a lot of districts were gerrymandered in favor of Republicans. President Obama believes that this has a lot to do with the Democrats' losses and said that, quote, "We have to end the practice of drawing our congressional districts so that politicians can pick their voters and not the other way around," unquote.
And now the Supreme Court's paid particular attention to North Carolina. There was a recent case. Could you talk about that?
Yeah, recently a U.S. Court of Appeals ruling said that North Carolina's 1st District and 12th Congressional District were drawn unconstitutionally by racial lines, packing minority voters into districts. The state legislature requested a stay of the lower court ruling, but the Supreme Court, in one of its first 4-4 decisions since former Justice Scalia died, and they denied the stay. So North Carolina has to redraw their congressional districts before March 15th.
And your home district in particular, the North Carolina 11th, has often been pointed to as a textbook example of political gerrymandering. Some say that when the last time the lines were redrawn, that Republicans in North Carolina deliberately squeezed out the Democratic Congressman Heath Shuler. Talk a little bit about that. Talk a little bit about living there and what you've seen.
Well, yeah, my home district is North Carolina's 11th. And we actually have a graphic of the North Carolina congressional districts. You can see in the far west point of the state is my home district 11, which is the purple one, and next to that is district 10, which is the blue one. And this is a map before the 2010 census. After the 2010 census, district 10 was drawn to encompass my home city of Asheville, which has a heavy liberal population. Before the 2010 census, that was a blue district where I lived in District 11 and a red district in District 10 next to us. Now we have 2 red districts side by side, and this can be a problem for Democrats in a lot of places because Democrats tend to cluster in cities, resulting in this easy gerrymandering.
Joey, thank you for joining us. Coming up next, Chinese trade is on the decline. What this means for their economy when we get back.
Welcome to Orange Press Pass.
Orange Press Pass is your ticket inside the Syracuse locker room. Hear from the coaches.
We got some open looks from the perimeter
and players.
Well, I saw pressure coming from the backside.
Get in-depth analysis, reports on site, and more.
Let's go on OPP.
Orange Press Pass, live after every Syracuse game.
They're coming. Places, everybody.
Light check. 1, 2, 1, 2.
Everything looks good on our end.
And lights.
Come alive with the forest. Visit discovertheforest.org to find a forest near you.
If you see news happening on campus, in Syracuse, or across the nation, call the CitrusTV newsroom 315-443-1177 or tweet at CitrusTV News, your campus news leader.
Around 50 years ago, the United States was involved in the space race with the Soviet Union. And most people who love freedom say that we won it when we were the first to put a man on the moon. But did we win the space marathon? Here with a story that's out of this world is Josh Feinblatt.
For those who don't know the news, Scott Kelly, the astronaut from my hometown, might I add, returned to Earth last week after spending 340 days, almost a full year in space. First of all, how amazing is that? Just imagine all the experiences that you have had since last March, and now imagine you were floating during all of them. This is not only a fantastic feat, being that it is the longest a human has ever spent in space, as long as you don't count anybody from Star Wars, but there are a lot of things we can learn from it. While on the International Space Station, Kelly conducted around 400 experiments, one of the most incredible ones being that he, along with fellow astronauts, grew a garden in space. So even without natural light, much less gravity, and no ground to be planted in, a pretty spectacular garden still survived. The most important experiment, though, was the experiment that would take place before, during, and after Scott Kelly's stint on the space station. The overall goal of Kelly's year in space was to study the effects of the human body after prolonged amounts of time in space. As Kelly said before leaving, we know people's vision gets worse after 6 months in space. What if around 9 months it gets really bad? Kelly's vision ended up being fine, but now that he's returned, he's going through a lot of testing to see how he could adjust back to Earth after such a long time in space. Originally, he wasn't able to walk because his legs weren't used to the gravity it takes to hold him up. NASA and 10 teams of doctors are currently running tests on him to see what has changed. Most notably, Kelly lost a lot of muscle density even though he exercised every day in space. What's been very helpful throughout this process is the fact that Scott has a twin astronaut brother named Mark Kelly, who's married to Arizona Congresswoman Gabrielle Giffords. While Scott has said that has had many tests to see how his body has changed in space, NASA has done the same experiments on Mark to see while on Earth to really see how space affects the body. NASA is still figuring out a lot of the results, but one immediate difference was that when Scott returned, he was 2 inches taller than his brother because of the lack of gravity compressing him. But he lost that 2 inches pretty quickly, so he only had the bragging rights for a short amount of time. Now you might be asking, why a year in space? Well, first, Kelly got over 700 awesome pictures on his social media, but NASA sent him up there for a year because that's how long it would take for a space trip to Mars. They're planning so that in the near future, hopefully we'll be able to put some astronauts on Mars. Until then, welcome home, Scott Kelly. Thanks for all your hard work. But if you see everything that you've missed in the past year that's been going on, you might want to head back to space. Now back to you, Alex.
Thanks, Josh. Recently, Chinese exports have plunged, leaving some concerned about a worsening global economy. Here to discuss trade and what the future holds for the world's second largest economy is Talking Points correspondent Zina Saifi. Zina, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Alex.
So my first question is, what's up with the slowdown? What's the reason that Chinese exports have been plunging so much?
I think the law of large numbers in finance applies to nations as well as it applies to companies. The more an economy grows, the harder it is to keep it growing at a fast pace. So China's economy has grown massively over the past couple of years that it's reached its capacity. They no longer can control it to the point where they have so much debt that they can't control, and they're too busy continuing to grow their economy that they're disregarding the debt crisis. In addition to that, every year they set themselves a target for their GDP, and a lot of critics have been saying that it's doing their economy much more harm than it is doing good. A leading economist, Leland Skeller, says that they're so obsessed with the GDP that it's become a political narrative more than it's an economic narrative.
And now, China, world's second largest economy, their economic fingers extend pretty much just around the globe. So what effect is this having, and could this have internationally?
Well, before in the past, if the Chinese economy went down just a little bit, it wouldn't have that big an effect. But because it's grown, the economy has grown so massively, now it has a big effect on all of the countries that it trades with. So first of all, in Wall Street, the Dow dropped around 109 points. And a big reason behind that was because of the economic slowdown in China. But not just stocks, it's also for trading. China, being the second largest economy in the world, it's also the second largest importer of both goods and commercial services. So that explains why there's a notable effect in the price of crude oil. And the trade balance, the trade surplus has been at its lowest since last year in March, and that's a big difference.
So what's on the horizon for China and for the world in terms of how this slowdown is going to continue, how this is going to affect the rest of the world? What's going to happen in the future?
Well, since it is the second biggest economy in the world, it isn't going to have that big of a difference, but some economists say that If these two signs of danger proceed, which is overcapacity and market sentiment, then that could lead to worsening issues. The issue with overcapacity is that they say that China keeps producing products that aren't needed. And if they continue to do that, that's not only going to have an effect on the companies, but also on the workers that aren't getting paid enough. And for the market sentiment, a lot of entrepreneurs, local entrepreneurs in China are starting to leave the country and take their money with them. So that begs the question that if the people themselves who are profiting the most from China's nexus of business are losing confidence in the nation, then what does that mean for foreign investors?
Zena, thank you for your insight. After the break, we will analyze the rise of Donald Trump. Stay with us.
So they say it's a man's world? I don't see anybody's name on it. While they were doing their thing, we slowly changed all that. Today, women can do anything men can do. And there's one thing we're even better at.
Hey, my name's Katie and I'm in the 9th grade. I'm an A average student and I'm an athlete working towards a scholarship. And everybody tells me how much potential I have. But I just wish someone would tell me where my next meal is coming from. Katie, how'd I do?
Do you have to be so serious?
Well, I mean, I did like a crazy dance in a movie if you want me to like, you know, do a little, no.
Play a role in ending hunger. Visit feedingamerica.org/hunger and find your local food bank.
At first, many thought that Donald Trump's non-traditional approach to politics disqualified him from being considered a serious candidate. Well, now he is the Republican frontrunner, and after Tuesday could have the inside track to be his party's nominee. Here to break down Trump's rise to power are Talk Points correspondents Tom Austin and Hearns LeGarrette Jr. Guys, thanks for joining me. So Hearns, I want to start with you because one thing that you always hear Donald Trump supporters say is he tells it like it is, and specifically, he's not politically correct. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Well, sure. I guess before we get into that, we got to define political correctness because it gets skewed oftentimes when it's referred to. Well, political correctness is the avoidance often considered as taken to extremes or forms of expression or action that is perceived to exclude, marginalize, or assault groups of people who are socially disadvantaged or discriminated against. Now, Donald Trump brought this issue up for the first time at his first GOP debate when Megyn Kelly got at him for the slurs he said to certain women. At that time, he said that he didn't have time to be politically correct. He didn't have time because he was trying to make America great again. Now, he's not the only one that has this sentiment towards political correctness. In October, there was a poll taken by Fairleigh Dickinson University, which 68% of people agreed that political correctness is a big problem in our country. Amongst that 68%, there's 62% of Democrats, 68% of independent, 81% of Republicans. So you can see this is not only an issue that Donald Trump has brought up, but an issue that many people in the country are having.
And so because of that, we've sort of seen the climate change in terms of outsider candidates emerging because they tell it like it is and people don't think they're politically correct. So how are other candidates, specifically more establishment type candidates, adjusting to this attitude?
Oh, big time, because a lot of people, you have to understand that you just brought up that this is the year of the outsider president. The reasons for that is that there's a lot of anger towards government, a lot of anger towards the establishment. So not only has Donald Trump brought this up, but you have people like Ted Cruz who brought it up while talking about Muslim terrorists. He said political correctness is killing this country. You have people, Ben Carson, he just dropped out, but he had made comments about political correctness as well. One thing that I think a lot of people need to understand is that political correctness is seen as a facade the government used to not tell the full truth in order to work around it, almost as a euphemism. So because political correctness is a problem that a lot of people have, they I guess vibe with a lot of what Donald Trump is saying, and that's why he's getting a large following.
And Tom, domestically, probably one of the biggest comparisons that we have to Trump is former Alabama Governor George Wallace, repeated presidential candidate. One example in particular is George Wallace once said, and this is a quote, "If a demonstrator ever laid down in front of my car, it would be the last car he laid down in front of." Donald Trump said a very similar thing when he was being told about Black Lives Matter protesters shutting down roads. Internationally, some zealous people compare him to Hitler. Are there any other international peers or contemporaries that we can think of that might tell us about Trump?
Yeah, I guess the contemporary that comes to mind who's most eerily similar to Trump is Italy's former Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi, who served 3 terms in Italy as Prime Minister. And I guess, going off of this political correctness issue or lack thereof, Berlusconi was very similar to Trump in that a lot of what he said was not really thought of by many as having any place in political discourse. There was a time when he called an opponent too ugly to be taken seriously. There was a time at an important international summit where he asked, the then Chancellor of Germany, Gerhard Schroeder, what he thought about, women. Something that is pretty recent that Trump had said, boasting about his own sexual prowess. Berlusconi said something, similar, talking about how think about all the women in the world who want to sleep with me but don't know it. And so there's a lot of similarity in that, and the similarities run deeper even, in that Trump and Berlusconi both are wealthy billionaires who made their money or initial fortune off of real estate, media manipulators, and masters of grabbing headlines and stuff of that sort. And so there are a lot of similarities between the two of them.
Tom and Hearns, thank you so much. This past week, America lost 2 of its best. The one that has understandably gotten the most coverage was former First Lady Nancy Reagan. As First Lady, Nancy was beloved for bringing her own kind of style and class to the office. Often appearing in her signature red dress, she brought a renewed air of elegance and formality to the White House. After the Carter administration had virtually banned alcohol from the White House events, Nancy brought it back, one of her crowning achievements. After her husband's term when he was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, she devoted much of her time to taking care of him. She started her own foundation and raised untold millions of dollars in an effort to prevent other families from dealing with the tragedy that she was living at the time. She also pushed for loosening of restrictions on stem cell research. When a Republican congressman publicly said that Ronald Reagan would not support stem cell research, one of Nancy's friends shot back with a simple reply. Ronald Reagan didn't have to take care of Ronald Reagan for the past decade. The love Nancy and Ronald, her Ronnie, shared was captured in a note he once wrote to her. "I more than love you. I'm not whole without you. You are life itself to me. When you are gone, I'm waiting for you to return so I can start living again." It's hard to fathom just how difficult her husband's illness was for her, yet through the long, heartbreaking loss of the man she loved the most, she still found the courage and inner strength to fight for more Alzheimer's research and awareness. The word heroic comes to mind when describing that kind of devotion. The other great American we lost was my favorite author, Pat Conroy. My dad introduced me to his books when I was in middle school. Conroy once wrote that he never wrote a line that made him laugh, though many of his books were pretty damn funny. But some of his most famous books came from a place of deep pain. The Lords of Discipline was about his difficult experience at a military college, and The Great Santini was about his traumatic childhood at the hands of an abusive father. The Great Santini is my favorite book. I've read and reread my copy so much that the cover's finally fallen off. It's hard to do Conroy's writing justice in a mere description. His sentences were flowery and full of over-the-top prose, even though often his subjects could not have been more simpler. By the time I would finish a Conroy book, I had developed a connection with the characters. They'd become real people to me. They'd almost become friends. To put it simply, Conroy did what all writers aspire to do, but only the greatest accomplish. He made you feel. When famous and influential people pass away, we often remember them, as perhaps we should, in the context of their careers, achievements, and impact on their country. But while we do that, we should also take time to reflect on the impact that their personal relationships had on those who knew and loved them the most. In the cases of Pat Conroy and Nancy Reagan, we have 2 people who inspired and touched the lives of millions, but we also have people who passionately loved those closest to them. In the words of one of Conroy's novels, "It is enough. Lord, it is enough." That's all the time we have for Talk Points this evening. Thank you for joining us. Be sure to check out Citrus TV News on Twitter and Facebook, as well as all of our content on YouTube. We are off next week, but be sure to tune back in on March 24th. For Talking Points, I'm Alex Amico. Enjoy your spring break, Syracuse.